Hey, folks, thanks for tuning in. Listen, we've got some interesting legislative language coming forward, and we wanted to have a quick conversation. So, Casey and I hopped on to discuss the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, strippers, and thought crime. So, first, I think we need to discuss and simply review what the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act is. Casey, do you want to give us a quick overview?
Yeah, certainly, and I love that lead in. It's like all the essential ingredients for a podcast recording, right? Yeah, so basically, the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act is kind of the main anti-hacking crime at the federal level in the US. It was instantiated in 1986, and famously, it was actually put together after Ronald Reagan watched the movie War Games,
Yeah.
kind of promptly freaked out, went to the DOJ and said, "Hey, we need a law that prevents this type of thing." And the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act was kind of the result of that. So, yeah, at its time, I think it did kind of what President Reagan was trying to get done. But obviously, a lot's changed on the internet since 1986, and yeah, it's been problematic. I think more recently, think about it over the past maybe 20 years or so, in the fact that people that are operating in good faith, the kind of hackers that we work with at Bugcrowd, and folks that are just out there thinking bad but doing good, working to protect the internet, they're the ones that actually try to obey this type of law. Whereas when you've got criminals who it's meant to deter, they're basically ignoring it, or it might even be difficult to actually enforce for them. So yeah, that's a quick primer on the CFAA.
I think that's great. Listen, there's a key line of language in that law specifically exceeds authorized access. And so
Yeah,
one of the things we all wrestle with now, this is defined as a trespass statute. So you find yourself on the other side of exceeding authorized access. And there's this notion, and caveat emptor, I'm not an attorney. I don't play one on TV or the internet. There's this notion of prosecutorial discretion. And
yeah,
so there's considerable variance in how a attorney general or any prosecutor will interpret this and choose to apply this. So this was made initially famous in our community through the prosecution of Aaron Schwartz.
yep.
Not going to go all the way into that, but significant price paid, massive pain. And Aaron's Law was a response trying to tune and correct this. So
Yeah,
follow, go
yeah,
ahead.
yeah. No, exactly right. I was just doubling down on that one.
Yeah. So like there's been a lot of ebb and flow. And listen, language is hard. And
Yeah.
folks are trying to do the right thing and create an atmosphere where we can defend. We can defend our infrastructure, our websites, our companies. And so moving forward, this is where the strippers piece comes in.
Yeah.
There is a SCOTUS. So the Supreme Court of the United States had a trial for Van Buren. Casey, do you want to brief on that?
Yeah, so basically Van Buren, so I mean, rewinding back on that, you talk about Aaron's Law, you talk about other, applications of the CFAA where it's gone poorly for people that you could pretty easily argue were operating in good faith, or at least not committing overt crime.
Yep.
There's a rich history of that goes back quite a long way, and there's been a lot of different efforts to try to amend the CFAA to basically recognize the fact that like not all hackers are bad. The problem with the
Those
authorized
criminal and
access,
civil, right? There's some terrifying things that
then
were
there's
applied
that,
here.
yeah.
That's right.
It can be applied in a criminal context or a civil context. And by the way, I'm not a lawyer either. I do play one on TV, and obviously we've been wrestling with this problem for a long time. So I know enough to talk about it. But anyone who's don't construe this as legal advice. If you feel like it's relevant to you in that sort of way, seek your own counsel
All
and
the
get,
EFFs call
get,
somebody.
get
Yeah.
an opinion on that side of things. But we can talk about it in terms of its broad impact and kind of more generally. Really, what it comes down to is that there's been all these different kind of attempts to basically say, hey, unauthorized access in and of itself doesn't necessarily constitute a crime. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're with intent trying to commit a felony crime when you exceed authorized access in a computer system. And a really good example of that is people that hack in good faith, right? Like if they're doing security research, it's even possible to do it by accident at this point in time, given how the internet's sort of built. So it's a fragile law, and there's been a lot of attempts to kind of at least create a carve out for security research so that when we're going out and doing things, we're not worried about getting our door kicked in. When it comes to the strippers section of all of this, basically what happened was there was a case against a person named Van Buren. Essentially, he exceeded authorized access on a registration lookup system. I forget which state it was, but it was basically a government system where he actually looked up the license plate number of a stripper. For whatever reason, he might have
It was
done
an
that.
FBI sting operation. I think it was in Georgia, but he was asked to look up this information. He did that beyond the scope of his duties, and CFAA was what they used to pursue him.
Yeah, yeah, correct. So there was a bunch of other charges that were kind of involved in that case, but the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act was one of the ones that got argued pretty hotly and ended up making its way up to the Supreme Court. So yeah, basically what happened was the Supreme Court ruling in the Van Buren case. Bugcrowd was involved in that. The Disclosure Project was involved in that in terms of amici curiae and writing briefings and trying to get SCOTUS across the nature of what's actually going on. And really what they found was that basically the fact that he was unauthorized in what he was doing, but still had the technical ability to do it, didn't in and of itself constitute a violation of the CFAA. So that became a precedent that could be used in context of good faith security research. There is the old saying that bad cases make bad precedents. And, Van Buren as a case was a really strange one to begin with. Its relevance to security research isn't a direct link. It's kind of extended from a precedent standpoint. So it's not a fast and steady kind of thing that we can kind of take to the bank, but it did set that whole conversation off in the right direction.
There's prior case law, and this was another bad example of it, where the terms of service on a website were then codified behind the CFAA because you violated the terms of service. Therefore, the terms of service become an extension of law. And so the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act can be applied behind violations of the TOS. So this is a terrifying thing.
Yep.
So as we're trying to, again, language is hard, clarify and improve and update, bring into, I don't know, the internet's 26 years old or something now. We're trying to bring this into the modern age. There's current work. There's an appetite for a conversation, which we're excited about this.
Yeah.
We need to have this conversation. This language desperately needs updated, but there's a current proposal that we want to bring forward. And so the Cyber Conspiracy Modernization Act, there's an important word you should all sit forward on, the word conspiracy.
Yep.
They want to add conspiracy into the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, and that's the principal edit. Conspiracy is terrifying because it moves more towards thought crime. Casey, what are your thoughts on this proposal?
Yeah, I think it's like the thought crime component of it in the absence of better clarification of what unauthorized access actually is or what a violation of the CFAA actually means. The application of conspiracy to such a broad law already is pretty terrifying, I think. I think if there was ways to kind of go back to what we were saying before around some of the amendments that could have been made with Aaron's law or other people that have attempted to do that to the CFAA over the years, if those things were tightened up and it was made narrower, then it would probably be less scary. And the reality is that I think, like the other thing that's a part of the Cyber Conspiracy Modernization Act is there's an increase of the penalties that are involved in any kind of activity around the CFAA, full stop, including conspiracy. And really what that's reflective of is the fact that like computer crime is a thing. Prosecutors do feel the need to have a tool like the CFAA to be able to prosecute legitimate criminals and to deter potentially others from doing bad things. So, conspiracy in general, I don't like changes to laws that make them broader and that add prosecutorial discretion.
It's an increase in prosecutorial discretion, right?
Yeah,
so it takes one prosecutor.
Specifically in a way that can affect us and what we're doing,
That's
like
right.
people that are actually here to try to help. If it affects criminals and makes it easy to put those guys in jail, cool. Like that to me makes sense, at least in its intent. But the byproduct of this, from my read and kind of going through it and talking to folk about it, is that it's going to basically increase the chilling effect on good faith security research. And frankly, like there's been a lot of progress in reducing that chilling effect over the past 15 years that we've been working on this, right? Like we talked about Van Buren. There's the DOJ charging rule changes that the guidance that they actually published in 2022. And really what that basically said was if you exceed unauthorized access, that doesn't necessarily mean you've committed a crime. As a prosecutor, you need to actually go out and seek a burden of proof that there's been a crime committed. Like
there has to be motive or something else.
Yeah,
like
there has to be like kind of a more traditional crime committed, right. and the exceeding of authorized access was a passage to that crime.
That's right.
So there's been all this progress made, and I think when you look at the hacker community, I think we're all breathing a little easier these days in terms of trying to do the right thing. This has the potential to really damage that. So I think that's kind of why we wanted to jump on and talk about it, because obviously that's us and something that we care about pretty deeply.
So I think that brings us to the call to action. So if you're in the United States and you're an American citizen, you can, and you're a voting individual, reach out to your senator. If your senator is sitting with or involved with the Senate Armed Subcommittee or Senate Armed Services Committee, reach out to them. If they're on the subcommittee for cybersecurity, reach out to them as well. Let them know that there is a hacker policy council that is actively involved, available. We want to partner
Yeah.
with Senator Rounds, Senator Gillibrand, anyone else that wants to work on this. This is the age-old conversation. We need to make it very tight.
Yep.
Hackers are not bad. We're part of the immune system that makes the internet
Yep.
safer.
That's
We
right.
need to make discussions around vulnerabilities safe. This
Yep.
is an important thing for public good. It involves safety with IoT and all of our cars and all the vehicles that now involve this. We need to be able to talk openly about the vulnerabilities and shorten the path from discovery to correction. And so we want to partner with those writing this language. Reach out, let them know we're here, but this particular language is going to be dangerous.
Yep. Fully agree with that. I think the other part of that, on top of reaching out and like literally this is how democracy is meant to work in terms of reaching out to the people that represent you and actually giving your opinion. I think for hackers in particular, like reach out to folks and tell them how you're actually helping make the internet a safer place, because
That's right.
they might not know that. Getting involved in things like Hackers on the Hill, where there's opportunities for technologists and policymakers to actually get together and understand each other better. There's a lot of opportunities for this to happen, but you can't assume that they know what we're talking about right now. So to be able to reach out and educate through that lens with humility, right? But
Yeah.
with that goal of like, we're here to tell you that like this is how this is going to affect us, which is ultimately going to affect you and your constituents. Like that's a really important and valuable conversation to have just across the board. I think the other thing to call out is, part of what the conspiracy clause kind of concerns me about when it comes to good faith security research is the idea of something being done in good faith that's then coincident discovery, or it's co-opted by someone who's using it maliciously or whatever else it might be. That could constitute conspiracy depending on how a prosecutor might be interpreting the law. One of the
Right.
easiest ways to resolve and make the internet resilient from that kind of misinterpretation on the vendor side is to actually publish a vulnerability disclosure policy
All the way.
that has a safe harbor carve out. Bugcrowd can help you run those programs. Disclosure has boilerplate language that you can just use anyway. And that's really why it's there, because this is an internet-wide safety issue, not just something that, Bugcrowd's happy to help and willing to help with all this stuff. But I think it's something that absolutely everyone should be doing, regardless of whether or not you're a customer of ours, right?
Well, you don't
Like,
need it just for your company. I would also press that you require it for third parties. So if you're
yep,
working with software providers, service providers,
yep.
require that everyone has this. Like this is a ecosystem level problem.
Yep, 100%. So yeah, those two things, like reaching out to your representatives, making some noise
Yeah,
about it,
that's
have
good.
conversations about this stuff in the open, but also encourage organizations, or if you're a part of one, encourage the organization that you're a part of to actually establish a vulnerability disclosure program with language that removes the ambiguity from this process for those that are operating in good faith. Still maintains your ability to go after bad people. This is not about that, right? And you said before, hackers aren't bad. The way I like to frame that is that like hacking is inherently dual use.
That's
So
right.
some hackers are bad. People do use hacking as a skill to commit cybercrime, and that's the bad kind that we're talking about. But hacking in and of itself is morally agnostic, and we need to have an internet that reflects that. Otherwise, the job of good faith security researchers becomes all that much harder. And we go back to, the internet 20 years ago, which I'm not a huge fan of.
Awesome. Let's put a pin in it right there. Thanks for
Yeah.
tuning in, folks.
Thanks. Cheers.